So, welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. Today we have a question from our friend Soren. Soren says, "Hey Ramsey." Hey Soren, what's up? Today, I stepped in the role of a coach for the first time for our K1 kickboxing class because our trainer couldn't be there. Training went fine. People said it was good. We had a lot of beginners in the class, and I felt the urge to give them tips for every correctable detail that I noticed. And there was a lot. Understandable, because beginners do everything wrong. That's to be expected. Soren goes on to say, "I was wondering if I should tell them all that I see right away, or if I should look over some mistakes and only tell them about some. I tried telling it all, and then gave advice to focus on one or the other thing first. Even though they seemed to enjoy the training, I kind of felt like the technique was still quite off. I felt like the best way to teach them would be to partner up with every single one of them to correct them. Sadly, there just isn't enough time. I tried to give an overview of the variations in blocking, catching, and escaping for kicking, because I experienced moments where I thought, hey, that's not how you do it, only to realize it's just another variation that's good in a different setup. But I am not sure if trying to give an overview does confuse beginners. So, I wondered, what can I do better about teaching, since I just did what I saw from other trainers of mine? I tried to look up some tips on the internet on how to coach a kickboxing class, but I couldn't find any. So I wondered, could you make a video about that topic in the future and give some of your experience of how to correct someone's mistakes and how much to tell right away? I also noticed that when I was a beginner myself, I didn't enjoy the trainers telling me too much while training because I felt like, yeah, I know what to do. I just can't do it yet. On the other hand, I experienced moments when I enjoyed the trainer telling very detailed stuff for how the technique should be or the background of why you block one way or the other, because then I knew what to improve on next. I guess you can't expect too much from one session. True. Just because this one felt special to me doesn't mean that it's special to the others. However, I am sure I can improve somewhere and felt like you have coaching experiences where many can learn from. Greetings from Germany, Soren." All right, Soren, thank you for that question. Man, that's a great question. Coaching, man, coaching. First of all, it's important to recognize that there is a difference between instruction, being an instructor, teaching, being a teacher, coaching, being a coach. Those are all different things. Instruction is pretty straightforward. It's how to do it, where to put your hands and your feet. You can find instructions for everything. My daughter and I were just watching instructional videos on how to do magic tricks because she's very interested in learning how to do magic tricks. How to make a coin disappear, how to magically teleport the ring from one hand to the other, things like that. All these sleight of hand tricks and illusions. So we watched some instructional videos on that. And these were instructional videos, not teaching videos. Here's the difference. We watched the videos showed us exactly how to do it. After watching the videos, my daughter attempted to do the magic tricks, and failed. She was not able to reproduce these illusions. Why not? She saw the videos, she watched them a couple of times. They were pretty straightforward. We saw exactly how the tricks were done. So why was she not able to do them? Why she hadn't learned them yet? So the teaching process hadn't happened. So we can stand up in front of a group and we can show them exactly the right way to do it. And they may or may not learn how to do it. Probably not, if they're beginners. Because beginners do everything wrong, because they don't know how to do it right. Kickboxing is way, way different than magic tricks. To perform an illusion successfully, I must successfully hide the coin from you, and then successfully move it to the other hand with a French drop or some little trick like that, so you don't see what I'm doing. There's a right way and a wrong way. If you see the coin, I've failed. If you don't see it, then I've succeeded. But there are way more variables, so many more variables in fighting. So that's a dynamic process, my friend. Because of that, error correction is the lowest form of coaching. Let me repeat that. Error correction is the lowest form of coaching. I know that temptation is there when you see people doing everything wrong to try to correct every little mistake. And as you said, there is not enough time in a class. There's not enough time in your lifetime to correct all the mistakes. I think a combat sports coach can learn a lot from a powerlifting coach or a weightlifting coach. Watch the way they teach. A great example here on YouTube, Juggernaut Training Systems. They've got a bunch of videos where they are coaching, not teaching. And they are coaching champions, coaching people who are very, very good at doing these lifts, who are very strong. They know how to do them. But when they coach, they do something very different than error correction. They give cues. Cues. What's a cue? Well, if you're doing a squat, for example, a cue might be track your knees forward over the toes and then sit. It might be a cue such as how to grip the bar, how to visualize pulling it down onto the back. It might be a cue about leg drive and how to visualize coming up out of the hole, something like that. And as a result, these cues promote a certain type of movement in the athlete. So when a combat sports coach starts giving cues, instead of trying to fix all the mistakes, something magical happens. Our athletes start moving in a way that is better, instead of trying to match a carbon copy of the coach. I did not have a great fighting career. I had a pretty mediocre one. So, I especially don't want my athletes to be a carbon copy of me. I want them to be better. I want them to be so much better. I want them to be the best they possibly can. And if I limit them to what I am or what I was, man, what a huge disservice that would be. I had an experience some time ago with my student Linji. You can see a few videos where we're sparring and doing some drills and whatnot. And he's a Japanese guy, and he specializes in several kung fu styles, Bagua Zhang, Xinyi, Tai Chi Chuan. And those are very different movement styles than the main canon of MMA, if you will. Boxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, Jiu-Jitsu. And those are all important skill sets to learn, and Linji drills those and practices those, and he's trained all of those things for a long time. But I found when I started coaching him, the movements that he used were counterintuitive to me. They were very different, and they felt wrong. And so at first I would try to get him to stop moving like him and start moving like me, to stop using these strategies that he knew and had spent a long time working on, and instead started doing something completely different. And that didn't work out very well. Trying to teach this guy who had a functional skill set to throw that in the garbage and start again from zero. And I had this epiphany one day when I stopped and I asked him to teach me what he knew, to teach me why he moved these specific ways. Because when I sparred with him live, rather than trying to teach him, certain things happened. He would catch me with all of these moments and all of these places I was not expecting. His hand fighting was very different and effective in certain ways that I had not anticipated. And so I asked him to teach me about what he was doing, and he did, and I realized, I've been going at this all wrong. Error correction is the lowest form of coaching. And so instead of trying to teach Linji to be a carbon copy of me, to fight like my perception of how an MMA fighter should be, I thought, oh, I need to teach him how to fight like him, how to move like him, in the context of MMA. And so I started giving Linji cues to use his movement vocabulary more successfully in the context of my sport. And as a result, improvement happened, learning happened, and we all got better for it. Error correction is the lowest form of coaching. You don't have time, as you well know, to pair up with every student and go over every single detail. It is imperative that you ask questions and that your students ask questions. And it is imperative that you understand the most important thing that you can tell them sometimes is, I don't know. But let's find out. And you may be afraid of losing face. You may be afraid of showing weakness in front of these people who seem like they are your subordinates. But understand this, they are not your subordinates. They are people who trust you to give them the tools that they need to win fights, to experience success in the realm of the combat sport that you coach. Recognize that a coach is not just an instructor, somebody who shows the way. A coach is not just a teacher, somebody who facilitates the learning process. A coach has the primary duty of helping the athlete to win, of doing everything in their power to ensure that their athletes have the highest possibility of winning at their sport. So it is imperative that we experience limitations, because without the limitations, we will not find the questions. We won't even ask them. We will not even formulate them in our minds. And if we do not ask the questions, if we don't ask the right questions, we will not find the right knowledge. We'll never get the answers. When I first took a martial arts class, it was a Taekwondo class. And I remember my coach, he was a 6th degree black belt from Korea, really, really good at Taekwondo. He would go about the class like a busy bee, adjusting people's arm and leg positions, not like this, when we would punch or kick or do the forms, and he would make these adjustments. I suppose in his mind, his idea was, if he moved our body to a different position and corrected these minor errors in our movements, that we would become better at Taekwondo. And personally, I simply found that confusing. Why is it that he's moving my arm here instead of here, or my leg here instead of here? Why does that matter? Because in a real fight, it's dynamic, and as soon as your opponent shifts weight to one side, or moves his leg this way, or hand fights this way, or punches you in the nose and breaks it, it's a whole different equation. And that cookie-cutter answer, that cookie-cutter framework, no longer works in that context, because the context has changed, and the context changes every moment of the fight. And so error correction is the lowest form of coaching. As soon as we fix that one little moment, it's a different moment already. And we can't fix them all. We can't micromanage them all. It's a big temptation to try to be a mother hen and pull all of your little chicks under your wings to protect them. But when they step in the ring or when they step in the cage, they're all on their own. And all they take with them is the experience that they had in the gym and the sound of your voice in the corner. And if you have not allowed them to fail and experience failure and fall from that nest, they'll never fly. Because that's how we learn how to fly, by failing first, by falling first. Let your students fail in the gym so that they can succeed in the ring. They will quickly discover all of their shortcomings. They will quickly discover what's wrong and what's right as soon as there is any pressure, as soon as there is any resistance, as soon as there is a live drill or a sparring session, as soon as they feel opposition and limitations, they will start asking the right questions. They will realize this is not the most effective way, and they will come to you with questions. Coach, how do I do this? Coach, how do I do this better? Coach, this isn't working. What am I doing wrong? We naturally resent being told that we are wrong because error correction is the lowest form of coaching. Even if we know we are wrong, if somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, Soren, you're wrong. You're wrong, man." In fact, maybe even watching this video, as I keep repeating, error correction is the lowest form of coaching. When your letter was all about error correction, maybe you took that personally. Maybe you feel like, I don't like hearing this because that's not what I wanted. That's our gut-wrench reaction to reject correction, because that is essentially what I've done right here. I've given you some error correction about error correction, getting a little meta on you. But you came to me with a question, so I assume you're prepared to hear the answer. What am I doing wrong? Okay. Instead of focusing on what we're doing wrong, let's focus on what we need to do right. Go back to the powerlifting cues. Again, watch how those powerlifters and how those Olympic lifters coach their athletes. They're not telling them, "You're doing this wrong and this wrong and this wrong. Do it this way." Instead, they give them cues of how to move correctly. They model correct behavior. They model successful patterns. And that's especially important when you have a large group. In a one-on-one training session, you can take all types of liberties that you can't with a group. But with a group, time is such a limiting factor. And so you have to make sure that you are using it wisely. And if you try to save everybody from their mistakes, if you try to be the Jesus of coaching, that's not going to work, my friends. Instead, understand that a coach coaches. An instructor instructs, a teacher teaches, a professor professes, but a coach coaches. That means helps you win the fight. My mission statement as a coach is very simple. I help my fighters to win fights. I coach people with successful patterns of movement and thinking and game plans and action that helps them win fights. I remember watching a coach once at a boxing event. I was cornering one of my fighters for this boxing match. And the fight right before ours, this coach was yelling at his fighter, telling him everything he did wrong. "No, you're doing this wrong. Do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that." Always focusing on the negative and what not to do. And guess what happened to that fighter? That fighter lost, and I was not surprised. That was a terrible coach. You can't error correct on the spot during a fight. You can't. Contrast that with one of my favorite coaches, Lew Cart at Brea Jiu-Jitsu. Go check this guy out. So, the other day, last week, there was a jiu-jitsu tournament, and I competed in this one. And Dan was coaching some of his athletes, and I was listening to him because he's a really interesting coach. And I'm trying to set up a podcast with him eventually. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to do it when I was in California, but so I'm listening to Dan coach one of his athletes at this jiu-jitsu tournament, and Dan excels at facilitating the process of coaching his athletes to win jiu-jitsu tournaments. He is really, really good at that. He's taken people who knew nothing about jiu-jitsu with a very limited time frame of instruction and seen tremendous success. He has coached blue belts to be black belts. He's coached black belts to be black belts who were better on paper. I mean, he's just really, really good at coaching. So I'm listening to him coach one of his guys. I think it was a blue belt, maybe a purple belt. I don't remember. But they're going at it. They're grappling. And his guy ends up missing out on the advantage point. His opponent gets an advantage point over him. And then Dan says very matter-of-factly, in kind of a deadpan voice, "Now you're losing." And he continues by saying, "What you need to do is this and this and this." But that stuck out in my mind. Now you are losing. Notice how he framed that. It's not negative. It's not don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other. That's one of the most important things a fighter or an athlete of any type needs to know, when they are winning and when they are losing. Because when we are losing, we need to step it up, we need to change the game plan, and we need to score. So as a result, that athlete realized, hey, I'm down on the scorecard. Because one of the biggest failings, especially in jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu tournaments, is not knowing how the game is scored, or not knowing what your score is, not knowing if you're up or down on points, especially those nitty-gritty advantage points and penalty points or whatever. They change those rules all the time, so it's imperative you have a coach who understands the rules of the sport and understands when you're winning and when you are losing and how to change that around. So, I read an article about Faraz Zahabi some time ago that shocked me a little bit, surprised me a little bit. They asked Faraz, who is an exceptionally good coach, and he's a good coach in person. I had a chance to train with one of his athletes the other year. He came to my gym in Shanghai. And just a really good guy, a guy who received some expert instruction and teaching and coaching. And I realized, man, Faraz is the real deal as far as coaching goes. He took this non-imposing guy and turned him into a fighter. Faraz is an excellent coach and instructor online, and that's a whole different skill set, being an online guy who's able to inspire and teach and coach and keep people's attention. It's straddling the line between entertainment and education. And Faraz does an exceptional job at that without compromising his standards as a coach, if you will, without turning into a gimmicky entertainer. But this article said, it was an interview. They asked Faraz, what makes you different than other coaches? And he said, well, I spar with my students. And that shocked me because I thought, well, shouldn't that be the norm? Because that's what I did. A lot of people that I know do that. They spar with their students. But if you look at the best coaches in the world in combat sports, that is the exception and not the norm. If you look at a who's who list of the greatest boxing coaches of all time, most of those guys never fought professionally, let alone sparred with their athletes. Cus D'Amato, for example, did not spar with Mike Tyson. Now, there's a great article my friend Paul Clement wrote about this subject, about a list of like 25 boxing coaches who coached world champions without ever having fought themselves, let alone sparred with their own students. But if you are able to do that, you are in a very unique position. If you have the health and the skill set and the ability to get in there and scrap with your students, you can teach them in all kinds of very unique and interesting ways. Because again, as soon as there is pressure, that is the only error correction that you need. Do as opposed to say. If you are not in that position, if you are older, for example, or you're training a bunch of killers who could light you up. Take, for example, Greg Jackson. Man, that guy coached some of the best fighters in the UFC. And if he actually got in there and scrapped with them personally, he'd get killed. He's at a physical disadvantage with most of the guys that he coaches. But his job is something else. He assigns them sparring partners, appropriate to their skill level and their size and their strength and all of those factors. And so when they get in there and they experience opposition, they get it. They realize, oh, this is why he's giving me this cue instead of that one. This is why this cue works, and why this preconceived notion I had does not. But when you can get in there and do it yourself, it can save a lot of time. So you don't have to arrange all of these meetings with sparring partners and whatnot. But coaching a beginning class, which is the situation you're in, but you won't always be in that situation, because eventually those beginners are going to learn something, and they're going to become intermediate kickboxers, and eventually some of them are going to move on to become advanced kickboxers, maybe even professional fighters. They're going to get good. They might even surpass you in skill set. In fact, I hope they do, and you should hope they do. Because that should be your goal as a coach, to make them better than you ever were or ever could be. There's a long, dramatic pause for all you folks out there who don't like long, dramatic pauses. Soak it in. Soak it in. Thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.